Okay, we're started. Well, welcome everybody to this week's Tactical Sovereignty call for the Matrix discussion group. And part, I think, of exiting the Matrix is being able to see the Matrix. That's step one. You gotta see the construct before you can get out of it. You've got to realize the bars that are around you and realize who controls those bars. In order for you to escape the situation you're in. And I think today everybody, I would say, across the world is definitely in kind of an extreme situation. And to me, this is not all of a sudden, boom, something that's happening. No, this is a result of something that's been happening step after step after step over time. But that is not specifically what tonight's conversation is going to be about. The past few years, when I started really researching and saying, where's the nexus between us and the state? I've known since a child that everybody was basically in bondage. Everybody was working for the state. They were the ones profiting off of everything. And they were also the ones not being reciprocal in the situation and taking care of their inhabitants. They were only profiting off of them. Number one job of any state is to take care of the inhabitants, and basically step one, really protect the borders. And when it comes to that, I'll just say 9/11. All right. It wasn't a case of having to protect the borders. It was even worse. It came from within. But that's a topic for another day. And the past 4 years of me starting to do this and going to throw my information into the Facebook group Tactical Sovereignty. There's certain elements that I've come across that I knew were pieces to the puzzle. And a little later on, I would find confirmation that, yep, that's definitely a piece of the puzzle. And then I'd find another piece. Yep, that's definitely a piece of the puzzle. Then I'd find another chunk that's off somewhere else on another topic. And it would seem like it doesn't have anything to do with it, but I knew it was a piece to those other pieces of the puzzle. The trick was connecting all those pieces together. And what I really came down to is, one, I think a lot of us have come to the realization that everything we've been taught is false, or at least a deception in some way. And you have to keep that in your mind when you're looking at things and when people are sharing information with you. You have to be able to decipher what is BS and what isn't. And some things look like the direction that things might be going in, especially like today. People will share, they'll share the same video over and over and over. And it's like, does anybody really think about that situation and what that really entails? And does it really make any sense? A lot of stuff is presented to even within, I'll say air quotes, the patriot community, that they grab, they hold on to, and they run with, and they keep pushing and pushing it, but they never get past that one bit of information. And I'll give an example of that. One main piece of information that gets grabbed onto and people never explore past it, which is what I was looking for. And that's where I was finding these puzzle pieces. And these started out as parts of the puzzle pieces, but they were missing something that would join them. And one of these main things is, I'll say, the three city-state empire that rules the world. We've got the city of London, Washington, D.C., and Rome, Italy. One is head of enforcement, or military. Another one's had a finance. The other one's had a spirituality or a likeness of spirituality. And they tie it together, they tie those three things together around really kind of one main symbol that they all hold in common that really isn't found in many other places in the world, and that is the obelisk. You always see photos of the obelisk in the Vatican, or at the Vatican. You see photos of the obelisk at City of London, the obelisk there on the lawn at Washington, D.C. And people kind of point to that. Well, in the back of your mind, where does the obelisk come from? And we realize that that obelisk really comes from Egypt. And coming from Egypt, it's like, okay, hold on a minute. Egypt doesn't hold a central power in the world. It's not part of the three city state empire. So how does this obelisk thing fit in? And why would the Vatican, why would Rome have an obelisk there? I mean, geographically, they're not that far apart, really, in the larger scope of things. But the US is even further away. And so that was one of the things that always kind of stuck in my head that just wasn't quite right. And we've known that signs and symbols rule the world. And that's one of the first things people point to, the obelisk, as far as signs and symbols ruling the world. Um, but I stopped and thought, maybe we're looking at the wrong signs and symbols. All right. Just like for years now, there's like the Dr. Rivera that's out there, and so many people that say that J word, they run the banks, they rule the world, they're the powers behind everything, they're the trouble. And I've told people, okay, you're close, because if you research further, you'll find out that you're talking about the wrong J word. It's actually the Jesuits. It's not a sect or a religion of people. It's actually people that follow a certain calling. And beautifully enough, they are the Order of Jesus, okay, or whatever. And so, with that thinking of everybody looking at the wrong J word, that also made me start looking at, okay, maybe we're looking at the wrong signs and symbols. And so I always have an ear open for some little thing nugget to pop up because it'll click in my head when I hear it, or it'll come up in my mind when I see it. And the other day, something popped up. Now, I just want to say if for some reason this call gets dropped this evening or whatever, and sometimes my audio goes out. If my audio goes out, please somebody tell me in the chat, and we'll wait for it to come back up. If this call gets dropped, which I did have a situation in the past where I heard a voice come over the line and said, "You've been disconnected by the moderator." I thought, wow, that's weird. I'm the moderator. So sometimes they will do that. And if that happens, I will just go and start a new link for this, and it will be part two. So anyway, going back to trying to keep an eye open, an ear open, this goes back also to what Scripture says. It says we're supposed to be in a constant state of prayer. Prayer isn't like when you wake up in the morning or at night when you kneel down and say, "Now I lay my head to sleep," da da da. No, we're supposed to be in a constant state of prayer. What's prayer? Prayer is communication. We're supposed to keep that line of communication between us and the Creator open 24/7, which means not blaring rap music all day or blaring Fox News or CNN in the house all day. God forbid. I was somewhere the other day that had the news going, and after like 3 minutes, I was like, holy shit. If I had this going into my house all day long, I would be freaking out right now. I mean, I would be scared shitless. No wonder I see all these people out in public wearing diapers on their face. Anyway, I want to say as well in the beginning here that in the description for this Talkshoe call, I have a playlist from my YouTube channel. If you go to the description box for that playlist, you'll find some of the resources where this information can be found at. These people all had pieces of the puzzle. If they all got together and combined them, it would be freaking groundbreaking. It would blow everybody's mind if these people would all come together. But I'm going to try and tie some of this information together this evening. All right, let me get on with it. Looking at the fact that people have been looking at the wrong J word, looking at the fact that possibly we've been looking at the wrong signs and symbols, even though they are important, that there's other signs and symbols out there that are even more important. And I found one. And this symbol took you right down the road. It took you step by step by step from what happened from the times of Egypt to where we are today and who's in charge and the rulers, the real rulers who are in charge. Some of them are the people we see in the mainstream, but we just don't realize who they really are. The first site that I would really recommend for people to look at is called thearchesofegypt.com. And that's listed in the description box of my playlist as well. When I went and put in arches, like you put things in different wording when you get on a search engine. And I would put in like Egyptian arches in the United States or arches in the United States, stuff like that. And predominantly what was popping up to me was obelisk. It was doing the same thing the Patriot community has done, is pointing me at obelisk. Go, look at the obelisk, look at the obelisk. I'm thinking, no, I want to look at arches, okay? And when I finally landed somewhere that would show me arches, then the road of history opened up. One of the most famous arches is the Arch of Titus. Arch of Titus was put up. There is a little bit of quibble about it, whether it was 71 or 72 AD after the ransacking of Jerusalem, or if it was as late as 80 AD. And it was put up by Titus's brother, who was his successor, Demetrius. Which was unusual because normally at that time when they would put up an arch, it was to celebrate a victory. It was to show a victory, and it gave credit to the current king, the current ruler, which at that time was Titus's brother. It wasn't Titus. Which begs you to wonder, why is it called the Arch of Titus instead of Demetrius? But it was important for him to pay homage to Titus because of the victory of taking Jerusalem in 70-71 AD. Okay? Because there is a requirement that has to be followed with these arches. And as you study them down through the line, you see that there's a criteria that has to be followed. All right? And that to me is as much of an example of what's happened than anything, looking at that criteria. Now, the criteria for that Arch of Titus was not to exalt Titus, but was to exalt the victory of Jerusalem, and that Rome had conquered Jerusalem. But you have to back up just a little bit. And it's interesting that they used an arch that they put up in Rome to celebrate that. Why an arch? Well, what happened before they conquered Jerusalem? They conquered Egypt before that. Egypt is full of arches. Um, they've got the arch Socrates, they've got the arch to Baal. That was the arch that supposedly they were going to go and show all around the world. They put it up in New York or D.C., in different other places, London. It was like taking a world road trip. And to me, it was kind of an example of conquerorship and ownership. And after Rome conquered there, Rome went on to conquer other areas of Europe. It's a long story, all the different battles that went on back and forth. And when people think of the Vatican as the seat of Catholicism, when you get in and really study, you'll find that Alexandria and Antioch were also holding equal positions with Rome, and they were all kind of vying over the top seat. At the same time, Constantinople was also kind of interjecting and kind of wanting to be part of that power. But at that time, once again, you had three cities that were basically trying to control a man-made religion and hold power over different countries of the world. Well, like I said, Rome went on to conquer other places as well. And through history, after that happened, along came Napoleon. That name Napoleon is very important, and I'll get to that later on. Okay. But Napoleon followed the same roadmap, the same trip basically that Rome had taken in conquering different nations. And keep in mind, Rome first conquered Egypt. Now, there's an argument whether Rome conquered Egypt or Egypt conquered Rome. Either way, they became meshed with each other. They became combined. If you look at like the headgear, the mitre hat that the Pope wears, it kind of looks like a fish head from the side. That's the same hat as the pharaohs wore. Look at other regalia of the pharaohs. It was the same thing as the Vatican uses. Um, Even look at that little skull cap that the Pope wears. This came from way back also in Egypt. And the reason why it was originally called a skull cap is because it was actually made out of a skull. And it was adorned with gold and different gems and stuff. But the important thing is what it was used for. Skull cap was also a cup, and it would be used ritualistically for the drinking of blood. Kind of makes you think of communion in a way. Just kind of pop in my head. So there was a mixing of what was going on in Rome, Vatican, what was going on with Egypt. You look at what was being worshipped. There was it was sun worship. Egypt worshipped Ra. They worshipped Isis. Right, that was a sun god. And you look at depictions in Christianity, and you always see the rays of the sun or light coming off from, the different apostles or holy people. And so you see this mixing going on. Well, Napoleon went on to go and conquer parts of Europe as well. He was going to take over the world. And what did he do? He was putting up an arch in all the places he went to as well. Now, this arch, people need to realize it's also referred to as an archway. Hey, I think there's archway cookies out there, aren't there? They make archway cookies. But yeah, this is an archway. It was a way. You look at the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, Missouri. It's a gateway. Well, why are they referring to these arches in this way? Well, if you go back in Scripture, it talks about the Israelites basically being chasing chased or followed, and that they are going through, I believe, an arch in Egypt. And Scripture says that for the Israelites, as they were passing through, everything was sunny and bright, beautiful day. But for those following them, it was dark and dismal and overcast. That's showing a metaphysical difference.
Ooh, honey.
All right. I've had everybody unmuted, but maybe I'll have to mute everybody just to prevent background noise until I open up for Q&A. Anyway, so it was a metaphysical thing. That's what these arches were about. Because everything Egyptian-wise, it's all very spiritual. Not religious, but spiritual stuff. Getting in contact with the other side from one realm to another. And with Napoleon putting these arches in all these conquered lands, that's one of the things it was depicting, is that the people were going from one thing to something else. Not just a sign that it had been conquered, but it was also a spiritual symbol of a transfer of realms, transfer of existence, a transfer of powers, a transfer of authorities. And if you look at the top of the arches, many times you'll see this quadrant up there, which is a chariot pulled by four horses. All right. And there's some that have Napoleon on there. Originally, I believe it was Janus that was up there, the god Janus. Because Egypt worshipped many gods. They had multiple gods. But Janus was the god you had, think about the arch, Janus was the god you had to go through in order to access the other gods. Just like in the church, you have to go through the priests to have sins forgiven or contact God. The month of January is named after Janus. So what do you have to do? You have to go through January, you have to go through Janus to access the rest of the year. More symbolism right there in our face. And I'm going to back up slightly here, back to the conquering and the ransacking of Jerusalem by Titus. And I would direct people, there's a couple places that you can look in Scripture, Hosea 9:3, and also 11:5. But specifically, I want to talk about one verse. And one of the resources for all this history you can also look at for the Israelites was Deuteronomy 27, 28, and 29. Those three chapters. Deuteronomy 27, 28, 29. But specifically, Deuteronomy 28:68. The last part of that verse states that the people will go back to Egypt, but no one will buy them. They're going to go back as slaves, but no one will buy them. Interesting. Also, in those chapters of Deuteronomy I listed, it mentions that the Israelites will return as slaves to Egypt. And a lot of historians think that because at the time that Rome conquered Jerusalem, and many of the people of Jerusalem were sent back to Egypt into slavery, they think that's the fulfillment of that prophecy. There's a problem with that. The problem with that is that Scripture says that all tribes will be returned. Now, when people think Israel, they think all tribes. No. Israel was the tribe of Ephraim. There was Ephraim and Benjamin and Judah, basically, that were at Jerusalem at that time. So, was that a fulfillment of Scripture? No, it wasn't. Because Scripture said all tribes would be returned to Egypt as slaves. And Deuteronomy 28:68 also says that no one will buy them. Very interesting. Something to keep in the back of your mind for a little bit here. If you also look at the history of the Israelites prior to Jerusalem being overrun, the northern tribes, it said, had been dispersed throughout the nations. They had already kind of taken off and had mingled in with the people of all different nations, which is very, very important because that goes back to what was said in Romans. In Romans, Paul talked about the fullness of the Gentiles, and that's what he was talking about, is that it was going to be an intermingling with the Gentiles. They were going to be incorporated into all these other nations, right? So that means that just the ransacking of Jerusalem and the people being taken back into Egypt wasn't the fulfillment of the prophecy. And it was going to be very difficult, really, for all the tribes to be brought back into Egypt. That's a very key thing to think about. Now, with keeping that in mind, think about all of these arches being put up as different nations, different lands were conquered. There was arches put up in the U.S., and they are roughly around the same time. But then we get back to the criteria of what has to be done with these arches, because they mean something. They're specific. They deal with a conquering, and they have to be put up in the same way. So when they were wanting to put up a arch for a celebration or memorialization of the Civil War, it was like, oh, wait, you can't do that. They had to do the one for the Revolutionary War first, and to George Washington. So they did that first, and then soon after, the arch for, I believe it was called the Soldiers and Sailors, is the name of it, was put up to commemorate those lost in the Civil War. And when you look around the world, even in Asia, a lot of times you'll see descriptions of these arches as talking about being a commemoration or a memorialization to the fallen soldiers. Well, we know that they like to use doublespeak a lot, but how did those soldiers fall? They fell due to a conquering. And that's what the archways were all about. They were like planting the flag on the newly conquered land. This is our land now, you know? And they would put these arches up. And these arches, like I said, were not just a physical thing, but also a metaphysical thing. It was a spiritual thing. Scripture says to build no idols or not to worship any idols or create any idols. Well, these monuments are an idol. It's a form of idol that was being put up. And like I said, a lot of times they were put up in the name of whatever god they were following, whether it was Janus on top or Napoleon on top, whatever the case may be, whatever Caesar they wanted to put on top, because the Caesars were to be worshipped as gods. These were memorializations to their gods. These were idols. Well, why does Scripture talk about not worshiping idols? It's not just because you're putting something else in front of your Creator, Yahushua or Yeshua. It's because along with these talisman and idols come the spirit that's behind them, or in the case of an arch, the spirit that's on top of them, like I had mentioned. You are inviting those spirits in, and you're letting that spirit take you from one reality to another, a gateway. You're letting it enter you, an arch, from one place. Metaphysically, you're accepting something else. And so these have been put up all over the place. And these are the signs and symbols that really should be paid attention to. And they're showing you how the pharaohs went from just ruling one area to then moving to Jerusalem and then into Europe. And then also Napoleon going and conquering those places, is you have to realize that whenever a place is conquered, you also assume the title of whoever you are conquering. If somebody conquered the United States today and say it was Humpty Dumpty, and Humpty Dumpty came in, guess what his title would be? It would be president. It's like, wait a second, how does this work? It's because they also own the title of Pharaoh. The one thing that first led me down this path was the fact that I'm blonde hair, blue eyed. And so I was kind of curious about me, where I came from. And somebody said, I'm hoping my mic's not on now. Everybody's muted right now. Don't worry about it. I'll unmute everybody in a little bit. Um, and so I started researching blonde hair, blue eyes. Where did it come from? And I came across a professor, actually an ex-professor from UC Berkeley, California. And I think she was researching and teaching some of the things that she was learning, and they didn't really like that. Because Lorraine Murray was originally, her genre was nuclear physics. And here all of a sudden, she's studying anthropology and bloodlines. And, we've always known bloodlines are important. And this right here, this information right here, is showing you why they're important, where they all came from. And Lauren Murray exposed the research, and now it's kind of easy to find online, that one, scientists pretty much assume that everyone with blonde hair and blue eyes are related and come from the same people. And the reason why is because it was found to have been an anomaly that started in the Mesopotamian area in the Middle East. Well, that's Babylon. Well, where did those people go? And you see the mummies of the pharaohs and people being dug up there. And oh my gosh, so you've got red hair or blonde hair and blue eyes. Oh, wow. Isn't that interesting? Well, after all the people from that area were dispersed, where'd they go? A lot can be found in northern Italy. People generally think of Italians, as the tall, dark, and handsome or whatever, but in northern Italy, you're going to find a lot of blonde haired people, predominantly. Where else did they go? They went up into, say, the Finland, Netherlands, up in the Dutch areas. There's also several islands that they can be found on. Also in North Africa, they can be found there as well. The Berbers, the Moors. Very, very fascinating stuff. And this last election, who did we have to vote for in America? We had a blonde hair, blue eyed woman or a red hair, blue eyed man. Interesting. So everybody they assume with these features are probably related, tracing back to Mesopotamia. And then when you look further, you find that all presidents have been related. Some have said Walter Van Buren wasn't related to the other presidents. I think he's an omission. But in the past couple of years, there's been somebody that's found, yeah, even Walter Van Buren, I think he was the seventh president, was also related. And if you look really at Walter Van Buren, where he came from the Dutch Netherlands. He spoke German predominantly. That was his first language, not English. So it makes very much sense that he was. And it's been found that all the presidents have been related either to King George or to Charlemagne. I want people to stop and remember back when Obama became president. One of the first things he did is he took a trip to Egypt, which at the time I thought that was kind of interesting place for him to go to. And when he went there, he went and visited. Was actually they showed him with a statue of, I believe it was Akhenaten, right? Pharaoh Akhenaten. And he made a very interesting statement. He said, wow. He said, he looks like me. I thought, whoa, 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 wait a minute. He looks like me? No, that's not quite the correct wording, because Akhenaten came long before Obama did. The correct wording would be, I look like Akhenaten. So why did he word it that way? You have to realize these people, like even Obama, is an attorney. They say things for a reason, specifically a certain way for a reason. When he said, gosh, he looks like me, what was he telling everybody? He was telling everybody, you want to see Akhenaten? You want to see the Pharaoh? Look at me. I'm the Pharaoh now. And, you know, going through that, there is just so many tons of information that fall in line with all of this. Um, that's why I put a few resources in the description box of that YouTube playlist. But more and more stuff the past couple days has just been falling in my lap that relates directly with this. I mean, even prior to starting the recording tonight, I was getting downloads of stuff. I was going, oh my God, I hadn't even thought of that. You know, it falls so much in line. And you look at the curses that were cast on Egypt prior to those people leaving. And I don't know if I had mentioned it or not, but on the inner wall of the Arch of Titus, you'll see a depiction of the Israelites leaving Egypt the first time, prior to Rome finally ransacking it. And so that was kind of a slap in the face to the Israelites. But you look at those curses put upon Egypt that was foretold that they would be revisited on the people again. And what were they? They were locusts. Well, what's going on right now in Africa? Serious locust problems, bigger than ever, as a result of um, not global warming, as I want everybody to think, but a grand solar minimum. Go online, listen to what different farmers are saying. That they're going bankrupt. They're losing everything. Um, there are meat packing plants that are shut down. And I think a lot of what's happening today is kind of a cover, not just for the banks and what's happened with them, but for that also. Well, one of the curses was plagues. Oh, gee, does that sound familiar? These are things to think about, important stuff. And we have to realize also that names are very important. There's certain names that were required to belong only to, like, the wives of priests or the wives of kings. A lot of those names are like Mary or Elizabeth or Martha. Um, I would recommend people research the priesthood of Jesus, because a lot of things that he had done, he would have needed to have been a priest. And that's what he was. He was actually a priest, not just a king of the people or a leader or a master, but also a priest. Um, the Last Supper. The Last Supper was a Passover dinner. And the Passover dinner could only be performed by one individual, the priest. And he performed Passover. What's happening today? Everybody today is being forced to observe Passover. Go in your homes, shut your doors, be safe. We're seeing all these things revisited. Now, I said earlier to keep something in mind. How in the world, since the tribes had been scattered all over through the nations, how would they be returned back to Egypt? Very simple. Instead of them going to Egypt, Egypt came to them. And if you want to see the path that was taken, look up the arches around the world and when they were constructed and why they were constructed. And you will see that Egypt has infiltrated the world, infiltrated Europe, infiltrated Asia, infiltrated the US. And I'm sorry, but as far as like the blonde hair, blue eye thing goes, like with Hillary or Trump, you can't argue with DNA. DNA is pretty much supreme when it comes to science. There's not much in science that is strong, but that is. I'm going to jump over, I think, and open the lines. You know, I had a piece of paper that I was working on a topic with that relates with what's happening today. And what I was writing down, I was trying to write down like the 3 or 4 main things that are occurring and try and figure out how they connect. One of the things that I wrote down actually was lockdowns, and I put / Passover. Ahead of that, I just had 3 other things written down. It was after I'd written that down that this other info came to me. So this whole page is just littered with 1 or 2 lines or a word or 2 here or there scattered all over it. And so I wasn't able really to write out an agenda as to how to show this info, but I think it's been laid out very well. Now, I also said earlier in the call, remember the name Napoleon. I just saw his name written down here on the piece of paper. People have to realize Napoleon was not his given name. That was not his legal name. He wasn't born with the name Napoleon. That was a title given to him. It was a title. Okay? So many names like Lord or God or Savior or Messiah, whatever, or Christ, those are not names. Those are only titles. And Napoleon was a title given to him. And Napoleon means the new Apollo. Very important. The new Apollo. Well, if you look at what the code name is for Donald Trump's code name is Apollyon. But even moreover, what is a Donald? What is a Don? It's the same as with other words like Roger. A Don is a royal name. It's a king. It's a leader of a family. Or might I say, a pharaoh? Something to consider. Well, I'll jump over and open up the lines if anybody wants to say anything, have a question, comment. Just let us know what title you hail by, and then go from there and try and keep it somewhat short, even though I went on kind of long. So lines are open. So it'd be interesting to hear people weigh in. And just remember, everybody's line is open right now. So if you're not speaking, you might want to mute yourself. Anyway, feel free to comment or not, whatever.
Good evening, Brian. I hail from Oregon. I go by the name of Tom.
Hey, Tom, how you doing, brother?
Doing really good. I got on a little bit late here. It was about 24 minutes after the hour when I got on the bridge, so I likely missed some of the real juicy aspects of what you just laid out. So I'll go back and listen to that. But the bit that I caught into where I got in was where you were speaking to the arches and the fact that Egypt has exported itself through the use of the idols. And I think it's a fairly interesting subject that it spirals out. There's really no end to it, because once you start getting an eye for seeing the symbols, you start to realize that they're literally erecting things all over the place. And one of the first things that I happened to take notice with was the obelisks. And, clearly those are Egyptian sourced symbols, and that they're put into very specific locations at very specific heights and made out of specific materials, and many times sourced from a specific location. And so I was very intrigued by that, because my background is in geographic information systems and geography, applied geography and geology. So I was like, well, what does this have to do with the physical location that they put these in? And so I had to crawl down that rabbit hole, and my goodness, there's a lot of depth to that hole, fortunately or unfortunately. But the fact of the matter is that they are very purposely utilized for their own ends. I don't like to necessarily call them goals, because it's not a definite goal, it's a platform. And
I would go ahead. Yeah, I would go ahead and call it a goal. There's nothing wrong with calling it a goal. And since you brought up obelisk, yeah, you definitely want to listen to the first 24 minutes.
Good. And the only reason I would, see it as more like a platform more than a goal is that it is energetically functioning. And so it's malleable. It can serve one purpose in the beginning of the year and a different purpose at the end of the year. And so it's malleable and like that. So, but I totally, I feel that you're totally onto something with the fact that an obelisk is a shape that can be walked through. And so there's a whole nother level of interaction that you get with that you do not get with an obelisk. But the other side of it is that the obelisk is sunk into the ground a certain distance. I don't know if that's necessarily the case with a arch. Have you looked into that?
I didn't go that far into it. Like I said, this just came in my lap like 2 days ago, and it fit together, like you'll hear in the first 24 minutes. It fit together a bunch of things that I've been holding and trying to figure out how they really connected. And at the same time, not just the arches even themselves and what they've been used for, and the events that have occurred around them, but also look at the symbol for Egypt, which was the eagle, or the phoenix. Okay, and a lot of people think that that's the symbol for the U.S. is an eagle, but if you look at it, and I can't remember the author's name that talks a lot about it, but you see that tuft come up on the back of the head. Well, an eagle doesn't have that. That's more of like a phoenix or a falcon that has that. Well, who else uses that? Lots of these countries have adopted it. Russia uses the double-headed eagle, but it also has the tuft that comes up on the back of the head. So there's that.
Back when we were going through the Obama years, an individual by the name of Freeman Fly put out some really intriguing content that connected the whole Akhenaten Obama streams of consciousness. And he put some artwork together that took the photo of Obama and overlaid it over the statue of Akhenaten. And my goodness, I had to go back and do it for myself, and I made a rendition of it, and it almost jumps out of the screen at you. It gives you a really uncanny feeling when you do that. And it kind of gave me a sense of authenticity within that stream of understanding. I don't necessarily want to put a context around it. I don't necessarily know what it means. A lot of people have insinuated that there's literally a physical connection between Obama's DNA and Akhenaten's DNA, and that it's the soul that was not connected to Akhenaten. But that's a whole other venue of.
There absolutely is. And Scripture talks about Antichrist, but also talks about there's going to be multiple Antichrists. Okay, and what is the Antichrist supposed to ride? Do you remember?
Oh, the horse, right?
Yeah. Well, what's the name of the presidential limousine?
The presidential what?
The presidential limousine. Do you remember what Obama named it?
Oh,
It's called the Beast.
oh. Okay, I understand. I was actually wrong. I said that he'd be riding a horse, but he's actually riding the beast, the seven-headed beast.
Right. Yep. It comes in on the Beast. I just thought it was crazy when he named the limousine the Beast, and they still call it the Beast today.
Yeah, I guess I never connected that part of it. One relative aspect to this that was interesting, this I believe was back during the first year of the current administration. The Vatican made a huge to-do about them unveiling this brand new white a white Ferrari. And the Ferrari is a horse. It's got a horse as its emblem, as its symbol. And they made sure that it was absolutely all white. And so I was like, holy smokes, they're literally using this car manufacturer to symbolize the white horse that is depicted as the four horsemen. And so I was like, okay, well, this is giving us some hint that some catalytic event is about to come down the pipe. And sure enough, within a few months, we were back into the Middle East, and Syria was becoming a much bigger issue. And, with the current administration, we've obviously had a re-embroiling of the Middle East that we were more or less detached, a little bit more detached from the last administration, just due to the difference in the way they were oriented. But I felt like that white car had the same kind of symbolism that you're speaking to with the limousine.
Yeah, and let me bring up a couple of things. I want to make a correction. Earlier in the call, I said something about the presidents being related to King George. There might be some lineage there, but it's mostly King Edward III that a lot of them are related to. And if you looked at, I remember seeing a recent video of people with this whatever illness being transported like to hospitals and stuff like that, and they're using a bus line, I believe. And the name of this bus line, or the name of this bus, was called White Horse Bus Line. It's like, wow, isn't that interesting? Now, when people look at Egypt as well, people need to realize Egypt consisted of three houses. It consisted of the red house of the north, the white house of the south, and the blue house. Your red, white, and blue. And so as Egypt took over all these different lands around the world into Europe, look at the European flags. You see red, white, and blue flags. Now, what's the color of the flags in the Middle East? Look at those.
Right.
Those are all the colors of the four horses. The four horses. Got the green horse, you've got the white horse, a pale horse. I mean, they use all the same colors as the four horses, and it's like, oh my God. Anyway, I just thought that's a little visual thing that people should check out because I found it very fascinating.
Well, I'll bring up this, and I don't know if it'll hold water for other people, but for me in my research, it really seems to be true for right now, and it plays right along the same lines of revelatory information that you come upon having to do with the presidents all having a common ancestor. Well, yeah, King George, and he was the founder of the English Church and got a divorce, and the whole thing was quite different after that. And the reality is that they're also related to Charlemagne, which may be the more formative ancestor, being that there's a sequence occurring wherein Charlemagne likely was the first Reich, and that the Second Reich came with the German Chancellor. The Third Reich we're commonly well known of because it was in our parents' generation. And now we're looking at the building of the Fourth Reich, and that the Fourth Reich is looking like it's actually going to source from a location much, much further west than where these previous three Reichs came out of. And that should be troubling for probably every single American living in the current era. But I don't think there's a lot of understanding as to the greater buildup here, and that it has to do with Israel, it has to do with a temple, it has to do with a nationalist ideology of a certain prophecy. And so it all kind of falls together, but I feel really like Americans are so partitioned and so scattered that they don't get a glimpse at that larger buildup. And so they see a lot of the smaller details, but don't put the bigger picture together. So I just don't know how fast we're culminating that. It seems like it's pretty fast now, but I don't know.
Well, like I said very early in this podcast, is that what people are seeing today, a lot of them are thinking, oh, this is it. It's finally coming down on us. No, this is a result of what's been set up through the years, finally coming maybe to a head. And people are always worried, for instance, about, oh, the New World Order. We got to make sure the New World Order doesn't come in. I mentioned, I think last week, that I finally broke down and at least attempted and listened to most of an interview with David Icke. And one of the first things he said in the beginning is, he's talking about the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is that they want one world domination. And I said, hold on a second. They already have it. And to prove it, try moving around the world and see if your debt doesn't follow you. Because all these nations are now underneath the IMF. Your debt's going to follow you everywhere. And when it comes like to the New World Order and the Old World Order, and one of the links that I have in the description box of the YouTube channel, which is also in the description box of this call on Talkshoe, that you can follow, talks specifically to this. And it talks about what the New World Order and the Old World Order was. And the Old World Order was, guess what? The king dies, who's the next king? It's one of his sons or his brother. It keeps shooting straight up the family tree. You know what I mean? That was the old order. That's the way things used to be done. And they kind of came together and said, listen, we're having too many uprisings by the people. We don't want to see them storming the castle. Yeah, I remember seeing a meme where it showed a bunch of people protesting outside of a castle, and somebody was saying to the king, you don't need to worry until they throw down their torches and they pick up pitchforks. You know what I mean?
Right,
And
right.
this is one of the things that was going through these monarchs' mind. And so what they do, they installed the New World Order. Well, you had the Old World Order. Picture it. It went straight up. Okay? The New World Order would be lateral, which would be crossways. Ooh, kind of looks like a cross or an X or the Swiss flag, might I say, because these are the people behind it. These are the pharaohs. And that crossways, that lateral section was, we are going to let the people vote for the new monarch, for the new king. But their choice is going to be somebody in our bloodline.
Right,
So
right.
that old world order going straight up and down is still going to exist, but all the people now will be voting for one of us. So they're going to feel like they're empowered. It's going to give them an illusion of power, and we won't have to worry about them throwing down their torches and picking up pitchforks. And that's what they've done.
Right. Yeah, definitely something to be said there about the Hegelian dialectic and the fallacy of choice. That it works so well from a psychological standpoint that it would be silly to use a different strategy to keep a large cumulative group of people dubiously working to keep themselves in a vulnerable position. You literally can entrap them to get them to keep themselves entrapped. And I don't know, man. It's kind of like, if anything about everybody being stuck at home, it forces them to see things online that they wouldn't have time for otherwise. And so they're coming up against a lot of information that maybe would brush off of them more quickly because they're so distracted with their everyday schedule and the earning of money and income and everything, that now they really can't run away from it. And so the idea that something else is happening out there that they just really haven't been tapped into is pressing in. And I don't know if that's going to mean something for our culture collectively, or if it's just going to maybe create a little bit of a wave of cognitive dissonance that people just ignore again once their schedules become a little more normalized again. But you can't really doubt that people are coming in contact with information that they just maybe wouldn't have before, or wouldn't have so often and so frequently now. So where does that lead? What does that mean? Because guys like you and people that are in the group, they live for that type of information. They don't necessarily run from it, but we all have more time to do real research now. We're not just tiptoeing and tap dancing within these themes. We're getting way down deep into them because we got the time for it now. So what will that do, and what will that change for our culture and our society going forward?
Well, myself, I don't think that it's going to change much for us. Well, I don't want to say us, but for this culture, and I don't even want to say our culture. I don't want to combine myself with e pluribus unum, out of many one. That's like
Right.
on our coin. And I would be derelict if I didn't bring up the Q phenomenon in this, as you talked about Hegelian dialectic. And what I really saw with that was that, and to me, this Q community is the mainstream alternative community. This is where they want people to run to, okay? But it's being used in their plan of the Hegelian dialectic, and that is that they've got to keep two factions warring against each other, while at the same time they're telling you to stay home, stay safe, shelter in place. To me, what's that telling me? They're telling you, abjure from the realm. You need to leave the system. You need to give this system the finger, go your own way, and exercise self-determination. That's what I'm seeing from it. And that the Q phenomenon was brought up to be that alternative place for people to run to. And where else was the Hegelian dialectic taught at? It was taught in the Q Academy, KEW. I shared this online over a year ago. But that was the first school, the lower school, before going to college and stuff, going to a Jesuit college like Fordham, that Trump went to. It was called the Q School, KEW. People can look it up, it's easy to find. And the Hegelian dialectic was taught there. They were teaching future leaders the information that they needed to know psychologically, really, how to run the world. And I hate using the word leader, because I mean it, this phrase, leader of the free world, to me it's like, huh, leader of the free world? If you're free, what do you need a leader for? You should be exercising self-determination. You should be ruling yourselves and working with your neighbors. You shouldn't be immediately looking for somebody up above to help take care of you. And so I find people falling for that whole system just amazing, because what are you doing? You're just trading one deception for another deception. And the same
Yep.
people are running both of those.
Well, that's really good information for anybody who listens to the call, who's been, dabbling in those information streams and feeling like it might have some legitimacy for them, because I really do feel like it's intriguing. It really does catalyze people's sense of intrigue. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of people do not have the inner mechanism to know the difference between what truth feels like and what intrigue feels like. And that's just an intuitive sense. Some people have a strong intuitive sense and other people lack that. And it can be honed. You can practice being intuitive, but even that's not really taught in our society and in our culture. And so when you come into groups such as yours, where we have people in there who have been on the trail, so to speak, for over a couple of decades, where they had some catalyst occur and they just never stopped doing their own research. And so the further they went, the further they started to realize that the collective narrative is really debased, and it's really it tricks people into being less powerful than they are. And I think one thing worthwhile to say about the Q phenomenon is that it's bringing in a rather new context that maybe has never been ever done in the world of propaganda before. And the phenomenon is called LARPing. And LARPing is very well known amongst the younger generation because they went out and did LARPing, in real person. And back when you and I were kids, we would just call it role playing. We would just call it making pretend, or playing a pretend game, Cowboys and Indians, or some tag game or something where people had a role to play in addition to the rules of the game. Well, with LARPing, go ahead.
I was going to say, for those that don't know what LARP is, it's capital A, capital L, capital A, capital R, capital P, and it stands for Live Action Role Play.
Very good. I apologize. I should have said that in the beginning. The whole point of it is that you are playing an active and ongoing role within the dynamic of the game. So you always feel like you have some way to affect what's going on. And unfortunately, that dynamic has been brought into the Q phenomenon, where they're having everybody go and read what's posted, and that creates intrigue by itself. But then they have these little go and look for these clues in people's words or in people's mannerisms or in some sign or symbol, and that they give them an ongoing role to go and play along. And if they see it, then they get to tell everybody else that they saw it. And so it creates this dynamic of volunteering your time, volunteering your energy. And so you literally get to feel like you're participating in something. And unfortunately, the participation is not in critical thinking. One major aspect of critical thinking is that you verify the source of information. And with Q, they leave everybody hanging. They say, we are a conglomerate of interested parties on the inside, and the information we give you will prove that we are insiders, but you don't get to know where, you don't get to know when, you don't get to know who. And so therefore, the critical thinking aspect of information verification is completely left off. And so unfortunately, they're taking it all in without questioning who might be feeding it to them. And that right there is a big, big, big red flag for anybody who's trying to do real research, because if you can't verify your information source, then you have to question its validity out of hand. If you don't, then you're getting into logical fallacy, and that's really hard to explain to Q people. It's like I love that you're like invigorated and excited to be a part of this, and that you want to be woke and informed. But I'm sad to tell you that you're participating in a disinformation program, and the way you can verify that is you don't know who is feeding you. That's a really big red flag.
Absolutely. It's totally anonymous. And at the same time, what they are doing is reaffirming that they are on the inside and you are on the outside. But they're making you feel like you're part of the inside, but you're really not. Why? Because they don't tell you who they are. They are operating totally anonymously. And that's why, like with this call tonight, where I've got very specific information that shows who the world leaders are, who these pharaohs are, where they came from. I put in the description box a list of resource information where you can find some of this at. And, it's sad to say that a lot of this info I've got over the past 3 or 4 years in bits and pieces from many sources. And so I can't give you all of it. It's just impossible. But I could put together some good, solid resources for it where you can go and research for yourself, and you'll probably end up learning even more than me. And if you learn more than me and find out more from me, you know what? I would be more than happy to have you contact me and show me what you found, and even do the same podcast again, and explain and show this to people, that this one world order has existed for a very, very long time. They've just kind of changed and become a new system, making people feel like they're a participant, which is exactly what the Q phenomenon has done. It's made people feel like you're a part of it. And, one of the things that always got me with Q is you would always see, where we go one, we go all. Well, I'm sorry. That means if one of you fall, you all fall. But it made you feel like you were part of a group of people. And that psychologically, that's something that people have always wanted. Everybody always wants to feel like they're a part of something, a part of a movement or whatever, where they really should be a leader of themselves and know their own knowledge instead of just following somebody else's anonymous knowledge that doesn't give you any resources or access to where this actually came from to verify it's true. One of the things that I've seen floating around, I think I mentioned earlier, was that, oh, Trump nationalized the Federal Reserve. Well, I'm sorry. The Federal Reserve is made up of multiple international banks. You cannot nationalize an international organization. If you could nationalize an international organization, guess what? You could take over the world with a stroke of a pen. So
it's interesting you say it like that, because I heard the same thing, and I kind of had this thought process go through me where, I don't necessarily see the Federal Reserve as an international thing. I mean, it technically is. Don't get me wrong. I'm not denying that. But it's more like it's an American thing that has a bunch of international families as trustees of it. So it might as well be an international thing, even if it's not on paper, So it's like you can never actually nationalize a bunch of European families.
Right. Absolutely not. You even go back, there's an interview on C-SPAN, it's easy to find online, where there was a congressional hearing, and they were talking to Greenspan, who was, I believe, the previous head of the Federal Reserve. And they're asking him about his relationship with the president and the U.S., and he came out blatantly and said, we're independent. We don't have to answer to anybody.
Yeah, that's a hard pill for the normies to swallow, but folks that read the Ron Paul books when they were first published, they're very, very well endowed in understanding the partition that occurred in 1913. Is the Treasury is supposed to mint our currency, and they've been I don't like to say hijacked, but they've been obsolete in their role to the government.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And one of the things that I hate the most, and I don't mind using the word hate, is when I see these supposed awakened people, YouTube channels or whatever, and they're always talking about our government, our constitution, our representatives, our congressmen. Like, I'm sorry. Something that you really need to research is the United States of America, a captured operation. Because this was a captured operation, and it didn't start with, and I see people post things about the act of, what was it, 1871 or whatever, when they set up a government for Washington, D.C. There's nothing unusual. Yeah, there's nothing unusual about that. The town I live in, they're incorporated. They set themselves up as a corporation. Cities all over the place have done that. That wasn't when it happened. That is the people within the Patriot Guru Guano community pointing you at the wrong direction. Like I said in the beginning of tonight's call, making you look at obelisk when you should be looking at something else. That was nothing. That all happened way back in the start with the writing of the Constitution for the United States of America, and then it goes in the first paragraph, and does it say, we the people of the United States of America? No, it says, we the people of the United States, to instill a more perfect union. Oh, wait a minute. They just switched entities on you. They're creating a brand new entity. And this was supposed to be something that was revising the Articles of Confederation. Nope, that's not what it did. They were creating a brand new government, a brand new entity. I've got a book here sitting in front of me, the 1953 Encyclopedia of American History. And it was talked about by the Informer. And he brought it up and mentioned a few things about it. And he just said it in passing, but I'm always writing copious notes. I spent a year looking for that book because it was pulling. It used to be a textbook used in schools. It used to be on store shelves, but it was pulled. It was yanked. They didn't want people reading it. And I spent a year online trying to find somebody that had it. I finally found it, paid a pretty penny for it, but let me tell you something. It's got some very interesting information in it. And it talks about the new government that came in. No, not a revised government, not an altered government. It says the new government, which was originally in New York City, by the way, for people that don't know that. That's where, hey, one world government, the Big Apple. Okay. Anyway.
Well, let me ask this because it really is in line with the major theme that you're working with here. It's been a question that I've posed to myself over and over and over as I've done my research, because a part of my research into American history has used a lot of sources that came from Freemasons. And Freemasons have been very well published. Others have been very sparsely published. But one thing that I've kind of noticed is that if you are a high-degree Freemason, you don't necessarily publish anything unless you have the green light from the greater organization. And so when I go back and I read content from Manly P. Hall, content from Albert Pike, I'm always asking myself, what role or orientation does the complex of Freemasonry have within the pharaonic complex or pyramid? And, I've always had to come up against the notion that a lot of the symbols that are erected here in the United States were erected, uniquely by Freemasons. There's really no competitive group with them for putting up symbols. They pretty much have the universal role of erecting these idols. And so I'm like, well, what role do they have to play within this whole thing? Because you don't necessarily get the suspicion that all of the erections are nefarious. You don't get the sense that they're all evil. You do get the sense that it is idol worship, but you don't necessarily get like this horrendously evil or whatever tone from it, and maybe some do. I have never actually visited Washington. I've never visited Philadelphia, and so my major overlap with old symbols from our country is in Boston. That's really the only place that I've visited that has some historic places to come to. But I came through there and I'm like, none of this stuff really feels like it has an overt bad undercurrent to it. So I'd love your answer around how you feel they've played a part or have been involved.
Well, you know what, and this takes. Whatever you want to call them, they were thrown out of pretty much every nation. And so what do? They went into the sex, SECTS, of those different countries, those people that were involved there. And one of them would have been like, people want to talk about secret societies like the Freemasons. Well, I'm sorry. If you know about the Freemasons, I guess they're not a secret society, are they? But
Right.
they got into there, and they got in. Look at the Jesuit universities in America, and
Right.
like I've said, that they graduate over 30,000 potential priests a year. Well, where do they go? There's not 30,000 new churches or priests being replaced.
Right.
No, they're told to go and infiltrate school boards, join churches, get on church boards, you know, do things instrumentally, get on the county board of commissioners and things like that to direct influence. And I think I might be getting away from what your original question was, but there was somebody in the chat that they posted two things. They were just posting words. One was Utah and one was UN. And when I saw Utah, I immediately think about where they keep all the information at. They're
Right.
at a place in Utah. Well, in Utah, you don't do anything unless it's okayed by the Seventh Day Adventists.
Right.
They run the state, and the same guest 9 posted UN, and I've got something kind of serious to say about the UN, and it comes down to the two beasts of the apocalypse, and it says the second beast. Scripture says, second beast shall cause men to worship the first beast. All right. Well, 10 years ago, there was like 13 countries that were not part of the IMF. And now there's only one or two. I think Venezuela and North Korea that are not members of the IMF. And so we've seen 10 countries that what happened when we went in, when the U.S. went in, they were forced to set up a central bank that followed the IMF. So what was the UN doing? I would see the UN or the military of the U.S. as that second beast, forcing people or causing people to follow the first beast. And now today, we might start seeing some stronger ramifications of what that first beast wants everybody to do and follow, as far as identification, proof of being healthy and clean. We have to realize everything is set up around servicing. It's all a service society, even the courts. If you have problems with your children, oh, what do they have? They have different organizations or companies that I'm sure the judges are well vested in, where you can go and get counseling on how to take care of your family, or how to go take care of your finances, or your DUI school. Go down the list. It's all about servicing you. So that was a bit of a rant, but I don't know if that answered what you were talking about.
Well, there's maybe a juncture that happened in the American past that's not so easy for outsiders to pinpoint, but maybe an actual Freemason who's been able to get some access to their internal literature more fully could discern where there was like a fulcrum point in the past of the American Republic, in that before that fulcrum point, Freemasonry was a certain thing. It acted within a certain parameter. A certain type of person would be involved with it. And then afterwards, it was fundamentally different. And, I don't necessarily have information myself, but there's a lot of information that hints to the idea that it was busted in half and partitioned into a north and a south. And so is the organization the same organization that was used to stand up against the British? A lot of people will hint that Jews,
absolutely,
atheists, and Jesuits were not actually offered initiations in the Freemasonic degrees because there was a conflict of deity. And we obviously know that's not the case today. There's plenty of Jews and Jesuits, within the Freemasonic complex. And, they're running countries. They're literally in some of the most powerful positions in the world. You could almost say that the Pope is likely Freemason as well as a Jesuit. And so I don't know if that was the case back when George Washington was the Grand Poobah. I haven't been able to verify that for myself, but I have a sneaking suspicion that Albert Pike was an altogether different type of Freemason than George Washington. How that might, be defined, I don't know.
I would say that comparing Albert Pike and George Washington, I think what's happened a lot in today's Freemasonry has kind of gotten slowly watered down, which makes sense because if you were to start a club and have certain initiations and then stop and consider what the people that continued your group would do 10 years from now, it would morph and change and maybe be watered down a little bit. I would say that what Pike was involved with and what Washington and the other founders, I won't call them founding fathers because they aren't my fathers, I only have one father, were involved with were pretty much the same. And I have a playlist on my YouTube channel from, I think, Dana Ashley, and where she goes into it. And she speaks to different people that were in Freemasons. And I want to get back to that word were. And to people who are in witchcraft and following a lot of the Egyptian kind of rites and things like that. And they directly correlate right back and forth with each other. What you are doing step by step in taking your oaths and things like that in Freemasonry are exactly the same with joining a witchcraft cult. I mean, to me, when I saw it, I was like sitting back, I was like, holy crap, you gotta be kidding me. I couldn't believe how exact they were. Now, to get back to that word were, um, a lot of people are sharing stuff over the past couple of years from, I think his name is David Steele. He claims to be an ex-CIA agent. Well, I've seen things from other supposed ex-CIA agents, and they've said that one of the first things that happen when you are indoctrinated with them is that somebody gets the first day holds up a bullet in front of you and says, "See this bullet? You are now entering the CIA, and this bullet can find you now or any time in your life." So, are you ever an ex-CIA agent? Eh, not really. So, what are
No,
the
you're never
chances?
ex-Jesuit either.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are the chances? Chances are you're spreading their propaganda. Otherwise, look at people look like, I can't remember his name right now, that was trying to produce the movie Gray State. Guess what? You get eliminated. You share this information, you get eliminated. And then people are probably going to look at me and say, "Oh, why haven't you been eliminated?" I'll tell you what, I had my house burned down. Fortunately, I wasn't there at the time. I've had every stumbling block along the way since that happened to prevent me from being able to take care of myself. And fortunately, now I'm at a place that doesn't even have a mailbox. All right. So good luck. I'm sure they can GPS track you if you're that important, but I don't think I am. So I'll leave it at
Well, it's
that.
your reach too. Yeah, it has a lot to do with your reach and the fact that you're not trying to be big on YouTube. That's a big factor in it. It's really an interesting thing because I don't know if you noticed this, but about 9 months before the executive order that made BDS illegal on college campuses, they purged all of the channels from YouTube that had anything to do with the subject of Zionism or the nationalist state of Israel, any of that. They purged it all. And it was an interesting window because it wasn't done like 3 weeks before, it wasn't done 3 months before, it was done a full 9 months before that executive order came down the pipe. And a lot of the channels that were literally hitting the bullseye on these subjects were the first ones to get yanked. Well, guess what? Who was left? Who was left over? Well, are they gatekeepers that are left over? You always have to ask yourself, why were some chosen to be axed and some were chosen to remain? You just never know these questions.
Well, you know what? That's very interesting. And one of the first things that comes to my mind is David Icke. He's supposed to be telling people all this info about what's going on and what the world plan is and everything, but he's up there with no problem. You know what I mean? Um, I got the hammer put on me with Facebook about 2 or 3 days before the big illness issue came along. I put up one post and I showed where the name of this illness has been used over the years. And since then, I've got like 4 or 5 groups that are all specific. Some talk about news that you don't hear. Some talk about just the spiritual side. Tactical sovereignty talks a little bit more about the legal side. But 95% of the time, I have not been able to post, approve members, or anything like that to those groups under my persona on Facebook. And I thought, wow, that's really weird. I mean, and you were talking about the reach. And so I went and I looked at my general Facebook page and I saw, oh, I'm about 400 people away from hitting my max friends on Facebook. But I also went and I looked at followers. And with people following me on Facebook, like 600-700 people, I was over that mark. And so maybe they're seeing me reach too many people. Now, I wanted to address something you had brought up earlier, and as far as where we stand today and who we are. Scripture talks about the remnant. Who is the remnant? Like I say on every call, you need to learn who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. I think when you learn those three things, you become the remnant. You realize that we are part of those 12 tribes, those tribes that were scattered. And from tonight's podcast, you learn that guess what? We got trapped back into Egypt. Not because we traveled over there and tried to sell ourselves into slavery and weren't bought, but because Egypt came to us instead. And did they have to buy us? No. That's why we weren't bought. They didn't have to buy us because we were born on the land that they already took care of, that they had already conquered. And those arches prove that.
Right, right. Well, it also makes it harder to walk out of Egypt, because you feel like you're surrounded on all sides. Anywhere you travel, you're still inside of the ledger domain of the pharaohs. And it's a woke feeling when you finally come to terms with the fact that whatever you were born with in terms of a spirit, soul, whatever, the ephemeral part of you, it likely is made up of portions of all 12 tribes, and that we're not supposed to go and physically create in Israel. We're supposed to live in Israel every moment of every day within our own vessel, within our own body. And when people do that on a cumulative basis, on a 1-to-1-to-1-to-1, then as many were doing it just by pure mathematics. And that, to me, was a big personal revelation in which transliteration of the word Israel is one of the worst blasphemies, that if you think that it's a physical place, you've already lost. You're not going to be a remnant at all. You've already given away all the power. And so what you're speaking to really kind of reaffirms kind of what I came around to, is that, God damn it, it's not about being of a certain ethnic tribe or a certain, earthly domain. It's your spiritual vibe, and that wherever you travel on earth, you'll meet other humans that you'll kind of like just resonate with, because whatever they came here with somehow just jives with what you came here with. And so you're able to create this state of Israel between you. And all it is a state of mind. It's a state of being. And that, to me, was like, it was too simple at first to accept. But as you start getting with it and you contemplate it further, you know that there can't be really anything else, because anything else is too complicated. You have to go with the most simple solution. So I don't know what America as a continent necessarily means, but I can say emphatically that the United States was supposed to be the birthplace of something that was supposed to be brand new unto the human race. But, as you said, Egypt came here as well, and so we're still bonded building pyramids. I don't know about you, but my back is tired and my spine hurts and my arms are done lifting things. I'm done with that. I'm ready to walk out. And it's not a physical walking out. It's actually more of a frame of mind that you have to wake up in the morning and say, well, I was given a name. I can use that name in commerce and defraud myself, defraud my family, defraud everybody around me. Or I can start bringing myself into association in the true vessel that I created. And, that's like a whole nother subject we can go down. But the truth is, every day you got to wake up and say, how am I serving the pyramid builders, or how am I serving myself? And that answer may not be so clear to you. You may have to go find some meaningful way to serve yourself. today, because you didn't yesterday and you didn't the day before that, and so you got a bad track record. But every day is a new day to start new, so there's that.
Well, and that's one of the things that a lot of people have a tough time with. And you brought up the name, and it's like, well, have you claimed what is rightfully yours, or are you operating under a presumption? And so I think that's one of the steps to take. And what's really important is it really important what man or government or state thinks of you, or is it important what your creator thinks of you? What relationship is more important? The relationship between you and your creator is the one that should be important, and the steps that you take and the things that you do should be in a way where you are drawing a line and a separation between whether it's the state or organization or agency or whatever that thinks it's in control. And I think one of the most beautiful things, and you touched on it, one of the most beautiful things that I think is important is we talk about, you know, we're born on this land that Egypt has conquered. Right. Well, you know what? They've actually given us an out, and people don't see it. It's too obvious. It's way too obvious, but people just don't see it. And that is that what this realm operates in is a total fictional or artificial realm. It's all digital. It's all overlays. Go online and look up the districts of the Catholic Church, or I would like to say Rome or Egypt. Look up the districts of the Catholic Church in America. Are you going to see all these different states outlined? No. You're going to see a whole bunch of different lines all over the place, all over this part of this continent. It's totally artificial, and digitally, that's what they've done as well. You are not part of something that really exists in the creation. You're part of an overlay. And so what you want to do is correct your position with that overlay. And why are you doing it? You're not doing it necessarily separate from state, although you are, but you're really doing it to be in accordance with the creator. That I'm existing as me. I am not wearing a mask. I mean, in Hamlet it said, I have given you one face, but you've put on another. How long ago was that? God, that was like, 1,500 years ago or so. It was talking about the same exact situation.
Right.
What mask are you wearing?
Well,
people are operating as an agent for an artificial agency without even realizing it. All you have to do is correct that.
Right. Well, you brought up a really interesting point there around the overlay, and that it's like an artificial transparency over reality. And something I'll bring up here is that when you look back into American history and you're reading about the founders and their relationship to the construct of Freemasonry, and they were all very pious individuals with relationships to their churches and their communities and stuff like that. One thing that you start to have to come up against as a question is, were these guys altogether more intelligent than even they were letting on? And that what they built was a associative trust that would oppress us and would become malevolent and tyrannical, and that they knew that would happen. But they also knew that there was an undercurrent of the creator in this construct of manifest destiny, and that you're kind of creating almost like a simulation where not only is it going to get so bad that the people will rebel, but it'll get so clear to them that they'll understand that their rebellion is in peace in love and in self-exile to the, I would say the entity. I just like to call it the entity because it is both a physical thing as well as a transformative thing or a metaphysical thing.
You know what? Hey, you know what? There is an organization under the Vatican named the Entity. You know that, right?
Yeah, I would not even doubt it. That's news to me, but I'm not surprised. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Let me give you an example of this overlay. Go back into Scripture and what happened in the temptation of Christ. You had supposedly Satan telling Christ, he was up on a hill and he said, I will give you all of this. Just bow down to me. What did Christ say? Did Yeshua say, did he rebut that? Did he say, no, you don't own all this? No, he didn't say that. He just denied his offer. Why did he do that? Because Satan was cast here. This is his realm. This is his world. People that want to say that God is in control here, no, he's not. I am sorry, people. He knows what's going to happen. You know who's in control here? The remnant is in control here. The only thing that Satan had was the imitation of control over this world. That's the only thing that he could offer Yeshua, is being able to control an artificial overlay that Satan had here. Because this earth, this land existed obviously prior to him being sent here. He couldn't have been sent here if it didn't already exist. This was already the Creator's land. So what did he do? He came here and he became the great deceiver, the great imitator. And he put an overlay. And people have fallen for the overlay and are existing as a part of the overlay. Instead of saying, no, I don't want any part of it. Like Yeshua said.
Well, I'll say this because you were talking about Napoleon earlier, and I think you went down some rabbit holes that are very parallel to mine just by the little bit that I heard. I got to go back and listen to the first part, but I'll say this. When I went back and diseducated myself about American history and started to really bring in the timeline that was being portrayed during Thomas Jefferson's presidency, where he came to power, some major catalytic events occurred, and the Louisiana Purchase was made American history. It was brought into the fold. I've always been intrigued by that. I've always wondered how in the world did that somehow happen. And as I researched more and more and more and more, I realized that America was not founded, it was incorporated. And Napoleon was a major, major stockholder in even the very beginning, before even the British colonies really became the main eastern seaboard colonies. It's like the French pharaonic aristocracy were major stockholders. And when it came to the point of contention where Napoleon had lost everything, he tried to march on Moscow and just made all these military blunders, so to speak. They literally sacrificed a lot of men on the battlefield, but so to speak, made all of these blunders. The blunders led to the unfoldment of the associated territories of our continent. And I just find that to be too coincidental, and that it was too auspicious for the new American colonies to be able to go from sea to shining sea. There's got to be a rub. There's got to be a trade-off. And so we're educated in school to ignore the trade-off, ignore the quid pro quo. But once you're an adult and you're mature, you realize that in the deceiver's realm, all energy is equal. There's never energy that's ever like wasted or expunged. It's always just transferred. And so you have to look at the quid pro quo of the Louisiana Purchase. And so that's when the beginning of all of the crazy, complex issues with having a constitutional republic became kind of like materialized within the society. You now had the Alien and Sedition Act. You now had all of this crazy, horrible statist situations. And the founders commented on this. They were like, man, shit's really going bad fast. What do you think is going on? Well, it sounds and looks and smells like we got a bunch of people who normally wear black robes all working feverishly to bring about a more centralized, association of resources than what we originally set out to construct. Oh, well, should we let everybody know that, or should we keep it to ourselves? Well, to a degree, they let people know, but largely they kept it to themselves, and that's where we're at today, where it's the same individuals who are at the upper part of the pyramid who all understand how bad it's going to get. And so what they do is they racketeer the profit and the colonialization of all of the little layers of opportunity within the degradation. Whenever you mine minerals from people or mine labor off of them, there's profit to be had. And so that's what they work to do, is to literally profit off of the degradation of the republic, because they already know it's designed, it's prophesied to get really, really bad before it gets better. And I think we're maybe, just maybe, at the final chapters before we start seeing the better aspect start to come into play. And that's, inside of us. That's these conversations happening on these communication devices, us speaking to what we feel we know or what we feel we understand, and creating a little tiny nation inside of America or inside of the United States where we exist as free people. And as more and more people join us, we're creating Israel. We're literally creating Israel on this continent. And that's a beautiful thing, but it's even more beautiful when people do it with self-awareness. They literally know that they're doing that and that they cultivate it in that awareness. And I don't necessarily see that happening anywhere. Religion largely keeps people from maintaining that type of awareness. And so when I come across individuals like yourself who say that you were brought up inside of that, but then have been able to transcend a lot of the moral aspect of it and the dogma aspect of it so that you can do your own research, that to me shows evidence that we are creating it here. There is a turning the corner point. The 100th monkey is building. We are building to that. What are your feelings around that? Are we in the final chapters?
Well, absolutely. I don't know if this is the final chapters or what. I mean, if you really go back and look at cataclysms that have happened with the world, it's like every 400 years or so, something major has happened. It hasn't really been taught us. I mean, we see people going to supposedly new lands, and they're finding huge buildings and monuments and stuff put up, and it's like, wait a second. And then we're being told, oh, yeah, they put it up. It's like, wait a minute, no, but those things predate them. You brought up the Northwest Ordinance, and a lot of people hear Northwest Ordinance, and they probably think like terms of Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, whatever. The Northwest Ordinance was actually northwest of where the founding of the nation had started at, which was originally New York. And so it was like Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio. Those were the areas of the Midwest Ordinance. And I lived for 3 or 4 years on an island about 5 miles off the coast of northern Michigan, kind of between Michigan and Canada, kind of in a way, Mackinac Island. And There was a picture somebody showed me actually, and it was from Illinois, and it was at a state park. And at these state parks, hey, they give you a little bit of real history. And on this plaque that the state had put up, it said that this land had been ceded from the French to the United States. And so, you hear a lot of things about what the U.S. did with the Indians. It was so wrong. Oh, wait a minute. That area was ceded, C-E-D-E-D, ceded from France to the U.S. The French were here first. The French were part of that White House, Red House, Blue House of Egypt. It goes back to that. You'll always keep that in mind. And I think that there are a few of us who are catching on to what has really happened and where we're really at. And I agree with you. We are the remnant. And I think that's an important thing for people to grasp and pay attention to. Is there anything you want to close out with? Oh, hold on a second.
Really... Go ahead.
Hold on just a second. There was something somebody brought up in the chat. And they said, none of us are actually bonded by any system except a concept of bondage. And I would agree with that. And because I want to say, I hear people talk and stuff and they say, oh, I'm a U.S. citizen. No, you're not a U.S. citizen. You have a U.S. citizen because a U.S. citizen is not a physical thing. And I can prove it. I'm not going to go into it here. But a U.S. citizen is not a physical thing. It's an entity. And this is necromancy that is going on within the system that people are accepting. Whether you want to put that hat on or not, that's your choice, not mine, right, for sure. Right. So anyway.
Well, you made a really good post leading up to this show tonight. It was like a flow chart that was supposed to depict the tribes of Judah. And I had never seen that diagram before. I've seen a number of things depicted like that, and I've tried to understand them as best I can, and I don't claim to have a lot of understanding around that. But one thing that is glaringly interesting about all of those depictions as it relates to American history is that all throughout our development as colonies into a more perfect union, there has always been this animosity between Francophone and Anglophone. And here in America, both the Anglophones as well as the Francophones were here before a lot of the other Southern Europeans and more Northern Europeans. And so there was kind of a preeminence or a predominance occurring. That's not taught in school, unfortunately, anymore. And the rivalry between Francophone and Anglophone for dominant control over the American culture was fierce. And so you have immediately, when you read about George Washington and Alexander Hamilton, as opposed to John Madison and Thomas Jefferson, you immediately get a sense that the first two cats were part of the Anglican tribe, and the second two cats were part of a non-Anglican tribe that was more allianced with the Francophone. And so when the French Revolution started to get warmed up, you could see who was very, very, very involved with that. And that gives you, the reader of American history, a clue as to which Francophones were very, very involved in our revolution, because it's mutually advantageous for Freemasons and kind of associates to Freemasons to help with these revolutions, because they literally were warring against monarchies and oligarchies. And guess what? that's what's been ruling over the Anglican complex since the Church of King John. And so here we are in America, where we see like this big entity called the deep state, but we refuse to think that there's still this francophone, anglophone war going on, kind of like mafias within a crime syndicate. Some of them are white hat, some of them are black hat, some of them are kind of gray in the middle, but the reality is they've all played a big role in the formation of our society and our culture and the way our finance system works. I just would leave people with the idea that you should go out and really research why there is such a difference between these two things, these two groupings, this island of England and the Isles, and the continental France, Italy, and Switzerland. All right, you put those three things together, and you have something that is kind of like at polarity with the English side of it. So I'll just leave it with that. That's something that's been a theme in my research forever. So I don't know if other people are seeing it though.
If you really want to learn that stuff, I would suggest going into the description box on my YouTube channel for this topic and look at the links in there, because it shows it to you. I mean, it's amazing. Like, we know signs and symbols rule the world, and we'll see presidents wearing a red tie or a blue tie, because we know those are both different houses of Egypt. And the blue is those aristocrats that you were talking about. And the red tie is those that are wanting war. Shows you where they're coming from. This is my attitude right now. They're depicting it to everybody. People just don't realize it. But my question to you really would be, because you brought up a more perfect union. Can you explain to me the difference between a perfect union and a more perfect union?
Well, yeah, I guess there's an idealism within that statement in saying that, or I would say they're hinting at the philosophy that human nature is faulted here on the earthly plane. And so anything we engage in, we should always engage in with the philosophy that it could be made better. We could always do better next time, because we've got the experience of this go around, that we could possibly do it better next time with this experience if we integrate it. And I always say to people, like, we want to gather knowledge, and we're always reading and stuff like that. That's only half of the game. The other half of the game is to integrate it and use it so that you can call it wisdom. And I think that more perfect union is kind of hinting at the idea that as much knowledge as you ever have or accumulate, it's not worth a damn thing if you can't implement it. And I think that's really where we're at, is we came together in the 1700s, but God damn it, we had slaves. Came together again in the 1800s, but God damn it, we still had slaves called wives who couldn't vote. All right, so we came again together in the 1900s, and we kept alcohol and cannabis away from people. So that's not perfect either. So we'll just keep on trying every 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And,
I don't know what 2020 is going to bring.
My only answer is abjure the realm. And if you look on my YouTube playlist, you'll find a playlist called Abjure the Realm. It was actually something written by Clint Richardson, and it was shared to me by a friend called Big Sib on YouTube. His name is actually Brandon Sibley. Him and I have been talking the past few days. I really love this guy. And when he shared that playlist of Abjure the Realm, and I was like, it didn't look like anything of interest to me, but I went and played it on my way to work here about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I was listening to it, and about 3 or 4 minutes in, I'm like, I know who this is, because it was a computer voice reading something that someone had written. And I was like, I know this thinking. I know the way this person talks. I know who this is. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, this is Clint Richardson. And so I did internet research, and sure enough, I found his document word for word. Yeah, it was Clint Richardson's. And it's entitled Abjure the Realm. And that's the only thing we can do, abjure the realm, because the realm today is purely digital. It's not being on the land like the Law of Nations talks about. They moved on, they morphed to something else. Satan put an overlay, and that's the realm. It's a digital overlay. That's all it is. If anybody else has anything they want to comment on or anything, feel free to speak up. Otherwise, I think we'll call this a night. Like I always say, people want to ask, what do I need to learn? Well, guess what? Learn who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. Because those will bring you to the solutions. That's where I started. And tonight, you've seen where I've kind of ended up at. And I think it pretty much has given me the answers I've looked for.
Yeah, part of the answers, because there's never any full answers in this realm, right? It's always part of the answer.
Never any full answers, but to me, this is an answer enough. And as far as I'm concerned with the things I've done, I've already adjourned the realm. So, you know what? This is a battlefield. They can go on having their battle. Just don't count me as part of it. I'm not a participant. Move my chess piece from the frickin' chessboard, please. Thank you.
Yeah, good way to put it. Well, thanks a lot for your contribution tonight.
Oh, thank you for your contribution. And I don't know if there's a whole lot more to bring forward, but we'll be back next Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, like always. And until then, everybody stay safe. But more importantly, learn who your master really is. It's not that guy that is plugged into the wall in your living room. Turn that crap off, because that's how the illness is getting spread. Good night, everybody.